Hello, Ryan here, aka Mac, and welcome. In this video I go through the Squadron 42 monthly report, letting you know all of the progress on the Squadron 42 front. As always, a huge thank you to all of my channel members and patrons. It is thanks to these guys that I get the time to do these kinds of videos, so if you do enjoy my content and would like to support even further from as little as $1 a month, it is all very much appreciated. All the links are in the description below. So, kicking off with AI combat, they continued to iterate on the Vanduul melee behaviour, which now automatically evaluates the suitability of specific special actions like dodging, jump attacks, melee attacks, and more. For melee attacks, damage is now triggered by collision with the weapon's blade. The Vanduul lance has several states that can be utilised by the behaviour, including extending when it is prepped for melee attacks, or keeping it collapsed when firing or aiming. Vanduul health was also further developed to reflect their different skeleton and activate the correct damage when it receives hits to different areas. Very interesting to hear how the Vanduul are coming together. Their lance will be quite a weapon by the sounds of it. I can't wait to see what it's going to be like going face to face with a Vanduul. Hopefully we can actually steal their lance as well and use it against them, or use it against players. That would be quite fun. But the Vanduul are making progress. So for social AI, the bridge crew behaviour now uses operator seat functionalities. They are using this scenario to extend the seated actor state to support some usable functionalities. For example, extending the idle and fidget system on top of the operator seats to allow the animators more freedom to bring life to seated scenarios. Now, I really like the sound of this, having NPCs fidgeting and shuffling about in their seats. Like we all do in real life, should make them a little bit more alive. Hopefully they can bring something like that into the PU at some point, maybe when we hire NPCs, or if you just see them around the world. Some Squadron 42 specific behaviours and functionalities were set up for the vendor character as well, and work was started on usables for the mess hall that will allow NPCs to collect and consume food systematically, and when complete, NPCs will be able to collect cutlery and plates, serve themselves food, and then occupy seats to eat and drink. This will all be part of the 24-hour cycle of all NPCs within Squadron, so they will go about their businesses, doing their job, and then when they have time off or lunchtime, they'll go and do other things. And you can interact with them at any point, talk to them, gather their backstories. It's going to be very in-depth. Anyway, on to animation. The team spent the month working on object and grenade throwing, knockdowns and knockbacks, and several new weapons. They further developed the weapon master, which is the guy on the Idris, I believe, capital ship seat interactions, the bartender, and AI ship inspections. They also made great progress into the NPC ammo retrieval, which was mentioned last month. They've made progress on Vanduul combat and female player faces and emotes. And finally, interrupts were added to several chapters as part of the ongoing scene work. So moving on to character art, the team revisited a few key heads, cleaning up skins, textures, refining hair, and are currently working with tech animation and cinematics to address facial animations. Alien-wise, the artists finished modelling and texturing the Vanduul armour and is now with tech artists for rigging, with the character team saying, "Work on the Vanduul looks fantastic and we are very excited about it." If you didn't know, the Vanduul armour is kind of fused to the Vanduul themselves. It's not like humans where we wear it over the top, it is part of their body, but the less armour a Vanduul will have on, the more highly ranked they are, showing that they're kind of fearless. They also began coordinating with tech animation on the Jan race and ironing out major anatomy and animation issues. Now, I'm also very excited to see these other races come to life. I feel that CIG will really create some incredibly unique races and such a high quality as well, and I look forwards to seeing them integrated into the verse with the Banu, the Taveran, the Jan. When we see them roaming around the PU, it is going to be very cool. Anyway, for audio, they refactored the footstep system to improve the audio on different surfaces, making it more responsive to player movement. And time was dedicated to the Lombard effect, which is a newly developed system that detects louder volumes and large amounts of noise in-game and makes the dialogue louder automatically. If this means that the character will then raise their voice while talking to you, that would be nice to see, and it'll add a lot more realism. And finally, the audio team also supported the visual effects team on triggering sounds when particles are generated on the GPU, which currently is not supported. The cinematics team investigated the auto depth of field focus system, which chooses a character of interest during conversations. This is to improve the situation where a player might be sort of roaming around and move out of focus, which would then cause the NPC to look past them, so they want it to be a bit more realistic. Several scenes moved past the implementation complete phase and into production. Once production is completed, scenes are then fully playable and deemed almost shippable, though a final pass is required for tweaking and finalizing lighting, visual effects, UI, and animation. But this alone is extremely exciting. They are getting very, very close. Finally, for cinematics, attention was also given to sequences that play out if the player reaches a game over condition due to behavior not befitting of a UEE naval officer. So on to engineering. This is going to be quite a lot to take in. The team added support for signed distance field local physics grids and signed distance field sets, interior grid markup for signed distance fields in the resource compiler, and G-force calculations for all actor entities. They also added a separate G-force collision calculation to the actor entity, and the option to export bit voxel geometry via the mesh setup and save it inside CGF was added too. With the signed distance field, this will mean that they are using signed distance field for collision detection and physics reactions. So similar to what we saw in Inside Star Citizen, where if your ship is bumped, you'll be thrown around inside. But this is a more optimized way with good performance increases as well. It's also much more scalable, and another benefit is for the cloth simulator. When a character comes in contact with an object, the animations will be nicer and more accurate while using less GPU resources. So a definite win-win there. Optimizations wise, they worked on multi-threaded RC bit voxel baking, which saves on performance and improves cache. The systems team added API to the crash handler, which will help them to analyze what the system is doing shortly before running into a deadlock, and Watchdog timeout logs memory usage at the time of the crash. So basically they want more data from their systems before a deadlock and timeout. All of this is mostly memory related. The API will give them more info on what the CPU was doing when it happened and see the memory usage from before it happened as well. Deep analysis was done to resolve the disparity between tracked and system reported memory use. Several improvements were made on both Windows and Linux to correctly track data moving forwards, including low-level allocator reserved pages and third-party allocations. This means they are fixing issues where system reported memory was not the same as tracked memory use, which means memory was not being returned and not being freed up in the system. So now it will correctly track data from the low-level allocates and reserved pages. The low-level allocator is the request handler for memory, so it's good to see it's tracked and what it's assigning to each call for memory. All of this is just making it faster to track bugs when memory is not being returned. Now, they also continued looking into the SIMD, which is an instruction set where one instruction can process multiple data at the same time within the memory instead of having one instruction per one data process, and looking at memory layout code for zone partitions being regions within memory. So in short, this means they're optimizing their memory allocation and return with the SIMD instruction. This is always needed and a normal thing to keep doing to keep it bug-free and stay away from memory issues. Now, they also implemented faster execution for scoped FPE enable and disable, FPE standing for float point exceptions, by eliminating linear search through all registered threads. This is more for the devs themselves, giving them a good way for debugging, and they have fixed several issues with ISPC integration, which just means bug fixes for the Intel compiler. So they also reduced the memory use of the P4K system and changed the memory address range to use CIG's API instead of the native OS API for memory tracking. So each memory location has an address as it points to the location. Windows has its own API to track this instead, so they are now just using their own in-house API to track the memory address range, basically giving them better tools to keep an eye on the memory allocation and more. Work was done on the Gen12 renderer, which continued with several refactors and optimizations being made. They've done some cleanup in the shader system, and renderer for thread safety continued, as did G12 brush rendering. They started to look into the DX11.1 API for intermediate performance improvements until Vulkan ships. For planetary atmosphere unified ray marching, the team established a general atmosphere context to avoid accessing memory globally. This makes it easier and safer to reuse shared code, and all related shader code was refactored as well. R&D into volumetric clouds continued, and detailed plans for experiments and next steps were drafted. The initial setup for the volumetric cloud renderer environment was completed. Code was restructured to allow it to be shared between planet atmosphere and volumetric cloud shaders, and the initial pass and injection of cloud ray march results into the unified atmosphere ray marcher was implemented. Whew. Now I'm very excited to see clouds come to the game. Hopefully they will be just as, if not more epic than those in Flight Simulator 2020. So they made performance improvements to the terrain displacement mapping and optimized the shader parser to improve turnaround times when editing shader code. And finally, they made further bicubic spline evaluation optimizations, made a planet terrain shadow pass, and fixed time precision issues in cloud animation. Wow. So a big thank you there to my techie friend who has helped translate most of that. A lot of it still goes over my head. I hope that helped you to take it in a bit more. But the engineering section is way too over the top technical. I think a lot of it is because there's no easy way to explain it, but let's hope that helped. Anyway, let's move on to gameplay story. They continued to work through the key introduction of ships early in the game, and 2 days of mocap was completed in the Derby studio, which has enabled the team to complete some long-standing tasks that could not be addressed through hand keying alone. For the graphics team, they predominantly focused on the Gen12 renderer last month, dedicating time specifically to conversation process so the old renderer code can be deprecated as quickly as possible. Various systems are currently being converted, including the gas cloud renderer, shadow masking, and runtime environmental probes. Improvements were made to the rendering API to allow simpler and more robust client code that's less prone to human error. Work on the Vulkan backend made good progress as well. Shaders were cleaned up to remove all unnecessary reliance on CPU uploaded data. Modern GPU performance means it's more important to save the CPU work in the renderer and driver than a few tiny instructions on the GPU. And finally, work on the organic shader continued, bringing tighter integration with the planets to enable the artists to use assets in a variety of biomes and have them auto-integrate into their surroundings. So some pretty exciting things happening there. Glad to hear it's all progressing. So on to level design, they continued to work on scenes, usables, and NPC behaviors. They moved 10 scenes to the gold standard level, meaning everything plays out as expected in the final game. These scenes vary in complexity to give the team an accurate representation of how long it will take to complete their tasks for the rest of the game. Very excited to hear that. It is coming together. They've continued to polish the ground-based levels while maintaining a strong focus on AI behavior and multiple traversal routes, and the development of important dogfight locations continued. This involved working closely with the flight AI and art teams for support on use cases and spacescaping. For the narrative team, they continued to review sessions, and as locations progress in development, the team generated additional environmental storytelling documents to give intrepid players more insight into the story, history, and character of the environment. Love that, thank you so much. I will be reading everything. With these playthroughs, they call out potential moments that could benefit from additional content, such as filling in potential lulls or calling out gameplay mechanics. The hope, they say, is to record placeholder versions of audio to block into the game and see how it plays, which will allow them to field test new lines in situ and iterate on them long before official capture. They also worked to help develop the Vanduul language, which involved a deeper dive into the race's culture. The QA team supported cinematics with recordings of each level to ensure scenes are working as intended and are at the intended quality. The UI team polished the personal inner thought system and external inventory, which will both be used in the PU and Squadron 42. They began looking at the various fonts used throughout the game as well, with the goal to unify and update them. UI tech team worked on canvas stitching. This will give other teams more freedom to add 2D and 3D spaces via building blocks. And they also began refactoring the color system with the aim to aid developers by making it easier to adjust colors across various UIs using a style sheet rather than adjusting RGB values, which will allow for vector gradients to be used in UI. So finally, on to visual effects. They continued to work on gas clouds, which are now mostly in the bug fixing phase, so exciting to hear that. They have continued to improve the texture sequence creation process, creating a faster, more streamlined workflow. And this is important to allow the artist to be more incremental with fluid sims, which will lead to higher quality explosions, smokes, and fire effects. Whew, so quite an extensive report this month, lots going on, especially in the engineering section, and it's great to hear that they have moved a lot of Squadron 42's scenes and levels and cinematics into the final stages, as it shows that they are really progressing well and getting close to completion. So lots of great updates. Anyway, that is the Squadron 42 report done and dusted. I will be now moving on to the PU report, which has some very juicy news in it, so do make sure that you are subscribed and tick that notification bell if you want to be notified when that video goes live. And if you can do me a favour, hit that like button, as it really helps out the channel. Come and hang out over on twitch.tv/supermacbrothers. Everybody is welcome. Big thank you to my patrons and channel members. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.